Hi, I'm Jo Kane and welcome to One on One. My guest today is Michael Gorman, the City Missioner. And it's ironic that I'm talking to him today when the nation farewells Sir Paul Reeves. And it was Sir Paul Reeves that said that we could straddle the fault lines of society and bring people together. So here we have in Canterbury with a focus very much on our people, on their houses, on businesses. We have EQC, insurance, we have financial costs, stress and anxiety profound. I have to wonder what on earth is happening to what I call those caught in the undertow, our vulnerable, our addicts, our mental health patients, the elderly, the beneficiaries. And Michael, I'm hoping you're going to tell us what has happened in our community with these people.
Well, we live in a complex age. I can hardly work my way through getting broadband into my home, let alone sort of the real issues of society. People are suffering, and I think that there is a tension and an anxiety. Whether it was always there or the earthquakes exacerbated it, I'm not sure. But there is a real anxiety in the community. That's coupled with a sense of some hopelessness. And at the City Mission, I guess one of the things we try to do is to instill hope again, or at least hold the hope until people can pick it up.
But how do you do that? Because I have seen firsthand on people that normally would be expected to get on with their business really struggling to keep their families together. But a lot of the people that you're dealing with don't have families around them, don't have people that are supporting them. So how can you give them that hope?
Well, I think one of the things is the respect with which you deal with them, because they're often the people who wait. They're in the queue. They're the people who are forgotten, that don't have a voice in the community. And so if you can listen to them, because they do have worthwhile things to say, treat them with dignity and respect. But I mean, that's a bit pie in the sky, because you've got to give them what they absolutely need for their existence, first of all. And so we have our food bank. And at the moment we're giving about 30 food parcels a day. And so that mounts up. After the earthquake we were giving about 90 a day. But we're giving about 30 a day at the moment. We're also offering night shelter accommodation. And believe me, with the snow, we're pretty full. And we've got social work support and a women's drop-in centre and drug and alcohol services. I suppose what we've tried to do is position ourselves at the margins of society where the people tend to fall through the gaps, and we try to lift them up from that.
Prior to the earthquake, many of them would congregate in Latimer Square or around our city, and of course the city is a zone now and it's very hard to access. What are they doing during the day?
The library staff used to be wonderful with our people as well.
Yes.
And they did, as you say, congregate in the city, live in doorways, that sort of thing. At the moment, some of them are doing very risky things. They're staying in red stickered housing, they're squatting, they are where they shouldn't be, but perhaps where they need to be because we aren't providing them with other places, really.
Do you think that our leaders understand it? I saw the program on TV that people were surprised that someone had squatted in their home, but the reality around the world is this is what happened, so Christchurch being no different?
I don't know how anybody can be surprised, because before the earthquake we had a homeless problem and now it's exacerbated again. So to be surprised is a strange reaction, you're right. But the poor are often somewhat hidden. You know, there are sort of, you can divide them up. You have the people who are, we'd perhaps call vagrant, and so they are not even wanting accommodation because it's too complex. It's too hard. You can't deal with the landlord. You can't get on with your neighbour. You don't pay the rent. You have disruptive relationships. And also, for some, home isn't a safe place. It was the place where they were abused and neglected and had awful experiences. So they don't want homes. But they do want shelter occasionally, and they certainly want respect. Then you have other people, and the respectable poor, who are absolutely struggling. But they are proud people. They are people with self-respect. And the hurdles they have to overcome to ask for help are enormous. And they are sitting in their houses without the heaters on. They are huddled up in blankets. They're living in accommodation that some of which you wouldn't believe. And now on top of that, that accommodation is sometimes not safe. At least, even though it was wet and damp and dark, it used to be safe.
But haven't we got what I call a new group of vulnerable, which is a big chunk of our community, people living in Bexley, people living in Sumner, people living on the hills, people living in Darlington, have become what I term the new vulnerable.
Yes.
Have you a role in assisting, and I see that Salvation Army is another one, that getting in and trying to help these people?
I hope so. You're right, there's a whole new group of people who probably in the past supported us.
Yes, yes.
And now they need help, and we would want to help. Do you know one of the problems, though, Jo, is that it is very difficult to find out who those people are.
They don't ask for help, do they?
And so if they did come to us, if we couldn't help them, we could maybe direct them to some people who could. So we would really like it if people do take the risk of asking us for help. You know, we want to treat them with respect and I use the term love, but not in the sloppy sense, but to treat them with love and to show them that we think that they are of worth and dignity. And so we want to be able to help. Sometimes, though, that's hard because it's a matter of finding these people.
I think our elderly come from a generation where you didn't ask for help, and it's got to be a concern this week with the weather, where people are living in cold houses and their health. Have you had a role in that, or have you seen more just this week in what happened? Yes, you had?
Yeah, we had to close on Monday and Tuesday, as a lot of other businesses did. And I didn't have staff who were able to get into the night shelter. So I took the risk of leaving it open and letting the men manage it themselves.
Really?
And that was a bit scary, but they responded beautifully. And then I also got a call on Tuesday from it was from St John's Ambulance, who had found this couple whose English wasn't their first language, who were living in conditions that were cold, damp, and they were really hungry. And they didn't know how to access systems. So we were able to go and I got one of my managers to get their four-wheel drive and go around to their place with food and a bit of encouragement. And our social worker will follow up with that couple later on this week or next week.
Okay, I'm going to come back just after the break and talk about what our politicians' response seems to be to those that are most vulnerable in our society. And welcome back, and I'm talking to the City Missioner, Michael Gorman. Michael, the Prime Minister said this of people who use food banks: it's their own fault for making poor choices. He also said if one budgets properly, one can pay one's bill. And I have to think about just about anyone in Canterbury that would have had their power on this week. What do you say when our decision makers come up with something like that?
Well, I'm always bemused by this matter of choice. The rich, or the comfortable, or the middle class, or whatever you want to call them, have a menu of choices. And you can choose what's absolutely good or what's absolutely bad. The poor have very limited choices. And then, from that menu, they are cut out from some of the choices by lack of opportunity, lack of knowing the right people, lack of money, lack of food, lack of education. And so their choice is a very narrow one. So, all right, they've got a choice. But their choice sometimes is between bad and awful. So to talk about choice, I think you have to be very careful.
Haven't we learned in Canterbury that it can, on one day you can be fine, and the very next day your whole world can be shattered, your whole life can be shattered? So it's a kind of a throwaway line.
I went through my life being reasonably comfortable because I was lucky in my life. The earthquake came and we've lost our home now. And I don't know what our future's going to be. Now, I can be absorbed by that to an extent because I have education, I have a job, I have family support, I have a wonderful partner. So, you know, I hate it, but I can endure it.
And you would know where to go, you know how to contact, but there's a lot of people that don't know that. And today we just had the decision on Kaiapoi. And I'm talking about communities and a stressed community, and when they feel that their backs are against the wall, when they have to fight that bureaucracy. Is there a role for the City Mission to step in a little bit?
Oh, I think there is. And, you know, like with Kaipoi, for example, we've sent van load after van load of food out there because they were really struggling. But also, I think there's a role for people like you and me to talk about this, to draw attention to the fact, like, choice. Oh, I don't think so.
No.
And being able to, if you can't budget properly, but costs of living, what's happening to that? Vegetables and food have gone up a lot. And, you know, to talk about budgeting is fine if you just have the same thing happen to you each week. But you and I know that the kids wear out their shoes, or the school camps come round, or...
You have to warrant the car, or you need a new tyre.
Exactly. And so they are the things that hit people. And power. Like, how do people pay their power accounts? We can help a wee bit with that, with some people. And we you know, want to do that. I'm always scared to say what we can do in case we're rushed, but we want to help people.
There's been some interesting volunteers helping out in the community, and one that took my attention this week was the Addington Action Group, who have seen a gap in our community, which is those that were uninsured, and that picked up some organisations and said, let's go and help. So we do have this capacity, but the question I would ask you, do we run the risk of letting our leaders and our decision makers get away with some of this because we as a community are so good at giving?
That's always difficult, isn't it? I suppose, you know, there is a limited fund and there's probably a limit to what the government can afford, and I think we have to accept that. But it should be about partnership, and partnership needs to be equal. It's not about Big Brother dominating the field. It's about all of us listening to each other and then trying to respond to meet the real needs. I'm not sure that always happens.
But what I'm trying to get a sense of, do you think that those that are running the city or those that are entrusted with making the decisions get an understanding that there is a percentage of our community that is really struggling at the moment, and there is a big percentage that are absolutely through the cracks?
It's always the case, isn't it? The person who speaks loudest gets heard, and the ones with the power are going to be listened to more. It's up to people like us to talk about the poor, about the marginalised, the people without the education to be articulate about their needs. But one really good thing was some council people did come to the mission, and they spoke with some of our homeless people. I didn't get involved with that because I wanted the homeless people to talk for themselves.
So this was in the build of the city plan?
Yes, and they came to talk about what the homeless might want. My fear now is that they think, oh, well, I've talked to a few homeless people, we don't have to worry. They do have to worry. Lots of houses in the inner city were at risk of gentrification anyway, I have to admit that. But now they've been knocked over and those bed sits are no longer available for people. This new city has to include cheap accommodation for people in the city.
You are on my hobby horse, and I go back to Hugh Pavlicek that I had on the program here, and it's the question that no one seems to want to answer. Where is the affordable housing going to go to? I had a look at the plan, and it's very nice housing in the inner city that they're looking at. Where do you get a sense that we're actually entertaining or looking at affordable housing that's not only sections, but where people can rent in Christchurch?
Well, that's the thing, but I personally think there needs to be a mixture everywhere. I think when you get ghettos, you get trouble. Now, the ghettos can be ghettos of the rich just as much as they can be ghettos of the poor. The expression can often be the same. You know, you close your eyes and don't listen to the words, and the emotion can be the same in both ghettos. But what we need is a mixture of people, and we need that in the inner city as well. We need the renters, we need the entrepreneurs, we need the rich, we need the poor, we need the charming, we need the disagreeable, we need all of us.
But do you see that in the plan? Where is the housing for? Who's going to rent their property to, you know, old Joe that's fallen on hard times and he's got an alcohol or a drug? Who's going to rent those places?
So I used to love the Christchurch City Council's housing. And I still do.
Yes.
I think they've got a record to be really proud of, and I love it. But I'm scared that it is getting onto the back burner. This is a great opportunity for them to really reinforce that and to develop it, and to then provide good accommodation for people who can't afford it.
Great. We'll be right back after this break. And welcome back. So I've got to ask the question, Michael. You've got a 10 million expansion plan for the City Mission, and I might turn around and say to you, well, perhaps you should be building the cheap housing for the vulnerable in our community. Talk us through where you are at with the City Mission and the thoughts. Maybe answer that question.
Right. We are developing this new building for a lot of reasons. There were reasons like safety for staff, because staff were in lots of buildings all over the place and they didn't have the support of each other. It was about the dignity of our clients who deserve good accommodation. Why should they put up with second best? It's also the fact that maintenance bills were horrific. And so we thought to ourselves, what should we do? What is the responsible thing to do? It's very easy to leave development to the next generation, but we felt we had an obligation to do it now and to set things on a good footing. We didn't know the earthquake was going to happen, and it did. And I think that there are other people, other agencies who should be into housing. The City Mission deals with the vulnerable and the poor, and we do what we can within that. But we know our limitations. We don't want to be landlords. We want to be people working alongside people, helping them in their everyday lives. Now, I don't know, maybe in the future, groups like us will develop housing. I think there is room for partnership. Perhaps partnership with the City Council, partnership with national government, partnership with churches, with community agencies.
Mike, was that in the mix just where we're at the moment with the council, where it's heading, with Sarah, who's also undertaken a new load of consultation within the community? Have you been able to get into that consultation to actually think about the whole of our community?
The housing groups are talking together, but the City Mission, I guess, up until now, we've been a bit shell-shocked ourselves, to be honest. We've just been trying to cope with immediate needs. Now, we could risk wasting an opportunity, so I think you're right. We have to be much more proactive. Groups like us, not just us, but groups like us. And the Christian Council of Social Services nationally are certainly talking about poverty, but locally the Council of Social Services and other agencies are working on these issues. And you know, it's going to be an indictment on us in the future if we aren't speaking loudly enough now about what we need.
I want to couch to you a question. There's over 350,000 New Zealanders that are on or currently reliant on some sort of benefit or welfare. And the report's just come out about reducing the long-term dependencies. And it quite rightly highlights it there. And I'll read, quite simply, the best way out of poverty is through paid work and through growing the economy and creating more jobs, and will improve the living standards in New Zealand. And of course, they've come out with quite draconian measures of targeting our young people with the cards, and we will do this. Have you thought about what the message is that the Conservative our government is showing us at the moment?
Well, I mean, I think the government's motives, like ours, are great. You know, we all want to improve standards of living.
Yes, absolutely.
And nobody looks at a young person and says, I'm going to wreck up your life. They look, I think, and think, how can I do it? You know, how can I make things better? But we have different views then on how that's done. Some people's view is, oh, it's their individual's problem. Others, and I'm on this side, say, no, it's a systems problem. And I think that, you know, you can't establish a program to get people into work when there is no work. And, I mean, it's all very well to say there is work, but our experience tells us there isn't enough. And so, I don't know, it seems like there's a bit of a clash going on.
if we put it into a Christchurch or a Canterbury context in the work, and I think all of us will agree education and good life skills are really, really important. And I'm really interested in that, is that even their job creation scheme isn't getting the young people in through here. So have we got the mix wrong? People, I'm trying to look at, say, people like yourself who are at the coal, right down that understand it, and why there seems to be this gap between those that have been meant to be making the decisions.
I don't really know, but
gosh, if you don't know, it's not auguring well for if you're the one that's working down there with and actually hands on. And the decisions are being made up there, we're in trouble, aren't we?
Well, we're dealing with a lot of people who will never be employable. And the government, I think, is slow to acknowledge that. There are people who are really sick. There are people who are so far behind the 8 ball in terms of education and in terms of the energy that it's required to sustain a job.
But that's not new. It happens all around the world. It's not new to Canterbury. Well, New Zealand. No,
it's not new, but what's happening now is that they are being blamed in a way they weren't blamed before.
Yes, I get that.
It's like when you establish a culture of blame, you cast villains. None of us are villains. We're all good people choosing what we think is the best thing we can do. Now, some of those choices are lousy because you don't have much of a menu of choice. And so I might choose to get plastered because it relieves the pain for me. And who is anybody to deny me that? I mean, it's bad. I'm not encouraging people to booze. But if it releases the pain for them, I can understand why they do it.
Michael, do you think they understand addiction? I mean, I thought they did when they got onto the chronic. Suddenly there was new legislation because this chronic, this synthetic marijuana, and they quite swiftly got down to it. But do they understand real addiction? Addiction to alcohol, addiction to drugs. There's other addictions that we have as well. Because you don't see the same swift measures coming down to actually help people. And smoking being another one. Putting the price up is not the answer to the addictive personalities that some of these people have.
No, putting the price up is good in terms of booze, and smoking, because it's proved that that actually is a really good measure to help cut it down. But if you're addicted, you're addicted, and you have to do things that help the addiction. For some people, that's an excuse. Of course it is. But for most people who are addicted, they are victims of that addiction, and most of them don't want that dependency. And so we need to work really hard to have good programs, robust programs, that help people with that addiction. And what we don't need is to blame. We're in a very blaming culture in this country. I mean, I get a wee bit tired of hearing people wanting apologies as well. I think we're punitive. We need to be more loving, more forgiving, and more accepting. We don't have to accept bad behaviour, but we have to accept the people.
We'll finish on that note, and the note that I want to finish is on, that perhaps we maybe need to think about walking a mile in someone else's shoes. Thank you for joining us.